In example 3, we are going to graph y equals negative 3 cosine of 2x. If you think about what's happening to the cosine graph, we're reflecting it over the x-axis, we're going to stretch it vertically, and then we're going to compress it horizontally. So we're going to take all that into account as we set up our table. So again, pay close attention to how we're setting up the table so that you can eventually do it on your own. The first thing we want is we want anything that we're taking the cosine of, this whole thing, to be those 5 key points. So this is what we are going to do first. So we are going to fill in the 5 key points here. So this is our 0, our pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. So no matter what's in the parentheses of our sine or our cosine, that whole thing is going to be set equal to these 5 key points. Then what we're going to do is we're going to do the cosine of those. So again, these are the things you have to know and have memorized. You're just setting it in the table with whatever's in the parentheses, and then evaluate the cosine just as it is. So if I take the cosine of 0, the cosine of 0 is just 1. Cosine of pi over 2 is 0. Cosine of pi is negative 1. Cosine of 3 pi over 2 is 0. And the cosine of 2 pi again is 1. If you don't know where these are coming from, take a look at example 1 again, or I can come around and show you. But remember, they're just coming from being on these axes, those ordered pairs. Now what we need to do is we need to figure out what x values we actually want to use to get that first period on our graph. And to figure out what these x values are, you're going to take the 2x and set it equal to each one of these 5 key points. So I'm going to move this up just a little bit here so we have some room. So I'm going to take 2x and I'm going to set it equal to 0. Remember, I'm taking this thing in here from my table, which is coming from the parentheses, and I'm setting it equal to the key points, the first one being 0. And if I solve that, divide both sides by 2, I get x is equal to 0. And that's going to go in here. Then I'm going to take my 2x, and I'm going to set it equal to the next key point, which is pi over 2. So I take 2x, set it equal to pi over 2. Here I'm dividing both sides by 2, or I can think about it as multiplying both sides by 1/2. And I get x equal to pi over 4. So pi over 4 goes in here. Then I'm going to take my 2x and I'm going to set it equal to pi, which is the next key point. So I get 2x equal to pi. Divide both sides by 2 and I get x equal to pi over 2. So that goes in my next box. Then I'm going to take my 2x and I'm going to set it equal to 3 pi over 2. Again, I'm multiplying both sides by 1/2, which is going to give me x equal to 3 pi over 4. So that goes in the next one. And finally, I'm taking my 2x and setting it equal to 2 pi. Dividing both sides by 2, I get x is equal to pi. Notice instead of my period going from 0 to 2 pi, I've shrunk it horizontally, and now I'm only going from 0 to pi within my graph. Then what I need to do is I need to figure out, well, what is my last point, my y value here? So all that's happening, I've already taken care of what's inside here. Now I have to multiply by negative 3. So I'm going to take my y value and multiply by that negative 3, because I've already figured out the cosine of 2x here by doing this and doing this. So my last thing to do is take the negative 3 and multiply by everything here. So negative 3 times 1 will give me negative 3. Negative 3 times 0 will give me 0. Negative 3 times negative 1 is a positive 3. Negative 3 times 0 will give me 0. And negative 3 times 1 will give me negative 3. And then what I want to do is I want to graph this on my graph. Now remember, I am using this point here, the x, and my final y is what I'm going to use to graph. So notice my graph is not going up by 0, pi over 2, 3 pi over 2 anymore. I've changed that because I changed the period. It's going from 0, pi over 4, pi over 2, and so forth. So let's graph that. So we have 0, next is pi over 4, pi over 2, 3 pi over 4, and pi. Taking a look at my y values, remember I am stretching my graph vertically by 3, so I'm going to be going between 3 and negative 3. So here's 1, 2, 3, negative 1, negative 2, and negative 3. And then I can plot these points. So my first point is 0, negative 3. Next point is pi over 4, 0. Next point is pi over 2, 3. Next point is 3 pi over 4 and 0. And finally I have pi, negative 3. Remember the cosine function is also curved, so it's going to form here, and as it comes around it's going to curve this way, indicating that it's going to keep on going and form that other U shape in both directions. So make sure you have the shape down as you graph it yourself. If you have questions, let me know.